Welcome back to Sports Extra, presented by Toyota. This past Thursday was Holocaust Remembrance Day, and on this show, it's appropriate and important to spotlight a story of sports' role in the healing process of really any tragedy. Well, this story is in the book, By the Grace of the Game, The Holocaust, a Basketball Legacy and an Unprecedented American Dream. It's written by Dan Grunfeld, a standout basketball player at Stanford University who played professionally overseas and then a short time for the New York Knicks. The book is about his father. You know him, Ernie Grunfeld, the former Knicks player and longtime general manager, sharing for the first time with the world how Ernie is the only player in NBA history whose parents survived the Holocaust. This week, Dan Grunfeld spoke with me about writing this book to tell a story too difficult for his own father to share. But just as important is the way this book depicts the game of basketball and the sport's ability to heal and unite.
When did you personally really see that the game of basketball had this unique ability to unite people of all different backgrounds?
My whole life. I mean, growing up, I always had a sense of the profound impact that basketball had had on my family. You know, my dad was a well-known player and then executive, but, you know, he came to the United States as an immigrant who didn't speak English and had never touched a basketball, you know, so I just always had this sense of what basketball had done for us. And now as I got older and got to know the story better, it really became my dream to share it.
And that's what this book is all about. Why did you want to write this story, a very painful story about your family's history in the Holocaust?
Yeah, it is painful. And there's a lot of darkness in our family's history, but there's much more light. You know, and I think it's a hopeful and inspirational story, and we all want something to believe in, you know, and so if you can read about a family who survived the Holocaust, fled communism, came to the United States. You know, my dad lost his older brother when they got to the United States, which was another big tragedy in my family. And he found the game of basketball, and it took us to places we couldn't have imagined.
So this was during World War II that your dad's father, your grandfather, was a prisoner at a forced labor camp in Hungary, and your father's mother, your grandmother, held captive in the Budapest ghetto, where she actually narrowly avoided a massacre that happened there. All of their parents were killed in Auschwitz, and then your dad and your grandparents came to the U.S. after fleeing communist Russia. So there was just this constant chain of survival throughout your whole family. When did you start learning about all of this?
You know, kids are perceptive and intuitive. And so I'm very close with my grandmother. She's 96 years old. You know, we were always very close growing up. She has a thick accent. She would talk about her parents, who I knew were no longer around. And so I always had a sense of what had happened. Then also my dad. You know, my dad doesn't talk a lot about some of the difficult parts of his background, but, you know, again, as getting older, we talked more about it, and I just learned a lot more about it.
And you mentioned earlier how your dad's brother, your uncle, his older brother, passed away from leukemia. And this was not long after they came to the United States. And of course, that's just a devastating tragedy. And that's sort of where the basketball story begins. How did your dad tell you, and how did you learn of the fact that he went to the basketball courts in New York City to find that escape, to find that healing?
Yeah, I mean, my book is called By the Grace of the Game, you know, because basketball really shined a light on my family when we needed it. He always says, you know, I just did what other kids in New York City were doing. I went to the playground in Queens, and what do you do at the playground? You play basketball, you know, and he said, I just wanted to learn English, make friends, and, you know, and heal from that loss. And
when did your dad actually realize, or did the NBA kind of figure this out, or did he just know that he was the only NBA player and ever, and still, obviously, to have his own parents be survivors of the Holocaust? When did that become a realization?
Truthfully, it was through this book. It was through my research and talking to Jewish sports historians from the major leagues. You know, the research suggests he's the only athlete in the history of all four major American leagues whose parents survived the Holocaust. You know, it's a hard history. It's not one my dad talks about a lot, and you can understand why.
This story, it's an American dream, a story about an American dream. It's a story of overcoming tragedy and hard work, but I also see the miracles along the way, but a family that's very aware of that. Would you agree with that?
Yes, 100%. I mean, there's a lot of miracles, you know, the game of basketball. My grandparents in general, you know, my grandmother's a miracle. Again, 96 years old today, the most hopeful, positive person. And, you know, she lost both parents and 5 siblings in the Holocaust. And my dad's dad, my grandfather, he lost everyone, parents, siblings. So he came back with no one. And to be able to endure that, to come to the United States, to build a life here, to be loving, warm, hopeful people, that's a miracle. And, I write this very, very honestly in the book about, my dad standing on top of the Olympic podium, winning a gold medal for the United States, roughly 10 years after coming to America with that background, so there's a lot of hope and a lot of miracles in that story.
I have the chills hearing you say that. And when I read it in the book, I mean, you get chills. Hearing it from you is amazing. Another miracle I do want to bring up, and it brings us, again, back to the game of basketball. Your dad going to Milwaukee, where he met Jerry Kahn, who is part owner of the Bucks. Tell me a little bit about the connection with Jerry Kahn and his daughter.
Yeah, Jerry Kahn is my late grandfather, may he rest in peace. So he was one of the original owners of the Milwaukee Bucks. And so my dad was drafted by the Bucks, didn't know anyone in Milwaukee. And so when he got to town, yes, any nice Jewish girls in town. And someone said, you should meet Jerry Kahn's daughter, Nancy, because my grandfather was associated with the Bucks and a pillar of the Jewish community in Milwaukee. And so that's where my parents met. And, we moved back to Milwaukee when I was in high school. So that's where I went to high school. And so the city of Milwaukee means a lot to our family. But the game of basketball, again, was kind of shining on my family and bringing us together.
Also included in this book is a foreword by Basketball Hall of Famer Ray Allen. In 1998, as a player for the Milwaukee Bucks, Allen first visited the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., saying it had a profound impact on him. So he became a student of Holocaust history. When Ernie Grunfeld was named GM of the Bucks, Allen built a strong relationship with the entire Grunfeld family, but Ernie never shared his personal story outside of basketball. In 2016, Allen was named to the board of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. And this is why Dan chose his family friend, Ray Allen, to write such a heartfelt and powerful foreword. Sports Extra will be right back.